Welcome back to The Explainer. Right now, inside you, there are trillions, literally trillions, of microscopic components working in perfect synchronized harmony just to keep you alive. Today, we're zeroing in on Section B of the C-Sec biology syllabus, looking closely at life processes but excluding disease. We're going to explore the dynamic biological machines of both plants and animals, taking a journey from microscopic single cells all the way up to massive, full-body systems. Let's get right into it.
Okay, so here's our roadmap. To make sense of the complex architecture of life, we'll be comparing how plants and animals tackle 5 fundamental life processes. 1, the base units. 2, fueling the machine. 3, internal logistics. 4, waste management. And finally, 5, the next generation.
Starting us off with Section 1, the base units, or the biological blueprints.
So to understand the whole macroorganism, we absolutely have to start at the very foundation, right? The unspecialized cell. You can kind of think of this as the biological blueprint. Before a cell adapts to do a highly specific job, it starts with these core structures. Whether we're talking about a plant or an animal, these basic building blocks all contain a nucleus, cytoplasm, and a cell membrane. But depending on the organism, that's where the blueprints start to diverge.
For instance, plant cells have some unique characteristics. They feature a rigid, freely permeable cell wall, really large vacuoles, and chloroplasts, which pack the chlorophyll they need to literally capture sunlight. Animal cells, well, they entirely lack those rigid structures and those little food-producing factories. In biology, you'll hear this over and over. Structure perfectly relates to function.
Let's put this theory to practice with a classic biological scenario, something you might actually see on a past paper. What happens if you take an animal cell and a plant cell and drop them both into distilled water for 15 minutes? It's a pretty brilliant way to see the actual mechanism of osmosis in action.
All right, so when they're in that water, H2O molecules are going to rush into both cells via osmosis. But the end results? Completely, vastly different. Because the plant cell has that tough, rigid cell wall, it just swells up and becomes turgid, or really firm. But the animal cell is bounded only by a flexible, differentially permeable cell membrane. It doesn't have a cell wall to protect it. So it's just going to keep gorging on water until, poof, it literally bursts. No way around it.
Moving right along to Section 2, fueling the machine, looking at nutrition and respiration.
Okay, every living organism obviously needs energy, but how they get it is a whole different story. Plants use autotrophic nutrition. They take simple inorganic stuff like carbon dioxide to manufacture their own food. It's amazing. Animals and fungi, though, rely on heterotrophic nutrition. Since we can't just stand in the sun and make a snack, animals have to use movement to hunt or forage, essentially freeloading off the complex organics that those autotrophs worked so hard to produce.
But hey, acquiring the food is really only half the battle. You still have to unlock the energy trapped inside of it. Enter aerobic respiration. This is an absolutely vital microscopic chemical reaction involving enzymes that releases energy in the form of ATP. And listen, it is absolutely crucial to distinguish this cellular chemical process from the physical, mechanical act of breathing. They are not the same thing.
Speaking of that physical movement, a classic bell jar model is a brilliant way to illustrate the mechanics of mammalian breathing. Notice how the rubber sheet at the bottom acts just like a human diaphragm. When it gets pulled down, it creates this pressure difference that physically pulls air through the glass tube, which acts like our trachea, and inflates the balloons, representing our lungs. It is just a perfect visual demonstration of pressure and volume in action.
Which brings us to Section 3, internal logistics, or transporting life's materials.
Once you've got fuel, you've got to move it around. Plants have 2 incredibly efficient biological highways for this. First up is the xylem. These are hollow, non-living tubes. They've got thick, lignified walls and no end walls at all, which allows for this continuous, totally uninterrupted flow of water and dissolved minerals being pulled right up from the roots via the transpiration stream. Then we have the phloem. The phloem's main job is translocation, basically moving the nutritional products made in the leaves, which we call the source, to wherever they are needed or stored, the sink.
Animals, on the other hand, face a totally different logistical challenge, mainly based on their size. Take a simple unicellular amoeba. It has a massive surface area to volume ratio, so it can rely purely on simple diffusion across its cell membrane to get nutrients in and waste out. Easy, right? But a complex, multicellular animal? Diffusion alone is way too slow for us. We require dedicated circulatory systems to transport oxygen, not to mention hormones to trigger irritability and rapid responses across massive internal distances inside the body.
All right, Section 4, Waste Management, specifically the excretion process.
First things first, we need to clear up a massive, very common point of confusion. Egestion is simply the removal of undigested material. Think of dietary fiber passing through as feces. Excretion, however, is the targeted removal of toxic metabolic wastes produced by the cells themselves. We're talking things like carbon dioxide or urea. If these metabolic toxins are allowed to build up, the organism's healthy state simply crashes.
So, how exactly do they get rid of all this waste? Well, plants have some fascinating, honestly pretty surprising strategies. Since they lack kidneys, they essentially use their own body parts as trash cans. They store toxins like calcium oxalate in their leaves and bark and then just shed them. Humans and complex mammals, meanwhile, utilize highly specialized organs. Our lungs excrete carbon dioxide, our skin sweats out water and salts, and our complex urinary systems filter out urea.
Finally, we hit Section 5, the next generation, covering growth and reproduction.
In flowering plants, this whole process kicks off with the seed. During germination, there's a really precise sequence of activities that happens within a dicotyledonous seed. First, it absorbs water, which is what breaks dormancy. Then, enzymes are suddenly activated to break down stored food reserves, actively converting starches into sugars. These nutrients are then translocated to the growing points, which allows the radicle to emerge as the first root, quickly followed by the plumule reaching up toward the light.
Now, over in humans, reproduction involves incredibly complex chemical signaling. It's fascinating to see how estrogen and progesterone fluctuate over a typical 28-day human menstrual cycle. You'll see estrogen peak right before ovulation, around day 14, which triggers the release of the egg. Then, progesterone rises heavily in the second half, and its job is to thicken the uterus lining to prepare for a potential pregnancy. It is a masterful, perfectly synchronized biological clock.
And that really brings us to a vital concept that spans across all these life processes: interdependence. Consider what happens when these biological structures are altered. If a corpus luteum fails to develop after fertilization, progesterone drops, and the pregnancy simply cannot be maintained. If ovaries are removed, ovum release halts entirely. If a vas deferens is severed, sperm can't be transported. A single structural change inherently dictates the absolute fate of the function.
Which leaves us with something pretty huge to ponder. We've just journeyed from a single, unspecialized cell all the way up to massive transport highways and synchronized reproductive cycles. If just one microscopic failure, like a blocked phloem or a severed duct, can ripple out and crash the entire biological machine, how much of an absolute miracle is it that these systems function flawlessly inside you every single second of the day? It is a real testament to the fragile, deeply interconnected architecture of life. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.